Good afternoon and welcome to Making the Connection. I'm your host, Pamela Cone. Joining me today is Professor Sean Frost and Serena Williams, and we're going to talk today about mental health among African American women, rethinking race and gender in mental health. So I want to let you know a little bit about my guest today. Professor Frost is a professor of sociology at Sinclair Community College. He has served as the chair of the Holocaust Remembrance Committee for 10 years. He is the director of Center for Applied Social Sciences at Sinclair Community College. He teaches courses in Introduction to Race and Ethnicity, Social Problems, and beyond Sinclair. Professor Frost is a member of the board at the Temple of Israel and the Church Temple of Israel Religious School Committee. Professor Frost is married. He is the father to 4 children, ranging in ages 24 to 15. And so we want to welcome him to the show today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you for coming and receiving the invitation. And I have my good friend, Sarah Williams, and she is an administrative assistant at the Gallery Foundation, which works closely with the National Mission Today. So that's why I invited her here today, because she understands the importance of dialogue and has participated in that very. So I met Professor Frost actually in class, and he was one of my professors when I was attending Sinclair Community College. And so I actually enjoyed this class, and we have actually spent some time together outside of the classroom, and he taught my oldest daughter actually also, and so I recommend him to a lot of students. So we probably go back as far as maybe 2008, 2009 time frame, so that's been quite a while.
Sounds about right.
Yes. And so actually, Sarah and I, we actually attend the same church. And so, and when she told me she worked for Academy Foundation, I said, National Issues Forum, I do work with them. So I thought it was fitting for them both to be here today. So welcome, Sarah, to the show.
Thank you for having me.
And so she's actually an avid listener. She listens every week. So I appreciate her for that as well. So today we're going to talk about, like I said, mental health among African American women. And in doing so, I wanted to bring light to this topic. It's been a year-long project for me, studying this particular subject. And it started out as an interest for personal reasons within my family. But I also wanted to explore it because after I started doing the research, and I started to understand that it was becoming a widespread issue. And for one, I understand that particularly maybe over in the past 10 years, that mental health has become a concern within the African American female population, and the diagnosis of mental illness has increased during that time frame. So that became somewhat of a concern for me, and then the project, as I said, was for an independent study and has become a labor of love. So I wanted to start today's conversation talking about really who the African American woman is, and kind of the identity that we have ascribed to her. And that's a generalization, and so it's not necessarily going to fit one person, but when we, by and large, as a society, maybe place an identity to, or descriptive words to African American women and to ourselves, the identity and the social identity, I think plays a huge factor in not only as how she views herself, but how this has contributed to her mental health status. And so I'm going to start with Sarah and ask her, what does she think about that when you think about the identity that maybe you ascribe to yourself or has been ascribed to you?
When I think about the identity ascribed to myself, it's normally coming from a strong black woman. And as a strong black woman, we are to take on so many tasks in regards to how this affects. I've got to be strong, I've got to take it on, I've got to take care of whatever it is. So for me, even in my aspect with children, a lot of times I didn't have time to try to figure out how this would affect anything. It was just, this needs to be taken care of for the child. I have to get this child to the hospital. I got to provide for this child, I have to be able to be of support for the child. So it's sometimes you kind of put that as your background to not even worry about how it affects me emotionally. You just take on the responsibility and move forward being strong.
I would agree. And Professor Frost, is there a history, when I'm thinking of a strong black woman or being the matriarch, is that a historical viewpoint?
Well, I think it's important to understand the history of the African American family, and I think that plays into a lot of the contemporary issues related to gender within African American families that we deal with today. We know the institution of slavery divided families and created a culture whereby there was less value placed on the complete family unit. I think in that context, women, African American women, have been tasked with being providers, both nurturing providers and financial providers as well, which I think would be too much for nearly anybody.
You know, I would agree. I would say, from my own experience, my father, I came from a two-parent home. And so my father worked part-time as a truck driver, and he had his own business. And so sometimes he worked 7 days a week. And my mother worked 6 days a week. But as far as being the nurturer, as far as being the one that you look to, the one that you look for advice, we would say my father was a man of few words, but he was always working. And so a lot of times he would be gone before before we woke up. And then he would go to work, and then he would work in his store in the evening time. So we wouldn't see him until late. And so that working and being a provider, I didn't have the aspect where my mother was the sole provider, but she was the sole source of stability in other ways in the home, whether it was spiritual, whether it was nurturing, whether it was that form of value that she added to the home that we looked to her, and still looked to her. I call her this morning because I had an issue. I was like, Mom, I got it, no. She said, well, good morning to you too. You know, don't disregard how I might be feeling this morning. And so, so I can see that role, and I could say in my own house, well, my husband and I have been married for 25 years, and so I would say with him being military, there was a lot of times he was gone for a stretch of time. One time he was gone for a whole year. And so that level, that sense of stability was primarily provided by myself. And so in many ways, I can see the matriarchal.
Yeah, and I would just say that really transcends race, that when we look at how gender is constructed here in our culture, we see that men are socialized to be financial providers, but socialized away from being nurturing and caregiving. For many generations, men have been actively discouraged from connecting with their children and providing that emotional nurturance, often perceived as a sign of weakness.
Yes.
I think, fortunately for our society and for myself, we've moved towards a better balance, where the expectations for men are that we are expected to have that emotional connection with our children. And as I tell my students, it's one of the greatest rewards that you could give to yourself, and to actively deny yourself that opportunity is a disservice not only to yourself but also to your children. A little off the topic.
I have to agree with you as far as the weakness when it comes to fathers. I even experienced that with my father today, where he will step in to help me when it comes to something that needs to be fixed, but if I need emotional support, he's not available. So that is something that I do agree with.
Now, when it was necessary, my father would. Like if there was something my mother said she couldn't, you know, dear, you take care of this. He would step in. But getting to the point of what is considered a weakness, I think for African American women, if it is a point where she doesn't feel, because even in my research, I found younger women, when asked, how would you describe yourself? The data showed that they would say strong. And a lot of them identified themselves with being African American before they did. And so we do, all of us, rise or gender and classification. Human first, but you're race or gender. And so just to ignore, and I was doing that myself, and I would say, honestly, I'm black before. But the duality that I'm finding in the research is that those two components play a big part in the well-being of African American women. And so to say, well, this is a weakness, that I'm not able to handle a million things at one time, or I to put the sacrificial type of personality, or the sacrifice that over the years and over time we've seen our mothers make, I've made personally, and what I'm learning, hearing the voices of the women in the studies are that this is how I got to the part of breakdown, where I'm having a mental health concern as of depression, because the studies show that anxiety is very present. Physical conditions are also becoming more prevalent than before, based on this, I can do it all in this regard.
Well, I tell you, it's becoming quite a strange day for me.
I think you hit on an important part. You mentioned it as a duality. I think that one of the things that I try to get students to understand is that these elements of our identity are the dimensions of diversity are all about the intersection. Where Pam as a woman meets Pam as an African American, and how those two parts of your identity shape the experiences and the behaviors you have, the perceptions of others, how you're perceived within the black community, but then within the United States community, the larger Dayton community. Those are all heavily influenced by the different parts of our identity, the different elements. We haven't even touched on some of the socioeconomic issues in terms of whether you're a poor African American woman or one who's more financially secure. And those are very important parts of the discussion, because so much of mental health or health care in general is determined by our socioeconomic status. So I think you're right on in trying to identify some of the struggles and difficulties at the different intersections in your life.
When we speak about, and I said, well, this is really, this is a gender. So it's race, it's class, and it's gender. And so when we talk about what makes the African American woman a higher risk for having mental health concerns, and I'm choosing mental health deliberately opposed to mental health. I'm choosing terminology because there's so much power in words, specifically because of stigma. We're going to address that a little bit later. So when we're talking about factors that would position African American women at higher risk, we would say what you're speaking of, the socioeconomic status, the lower income, additional health concerns, such as high blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol, those issues. And even we can see a rise not only in heart attacks, we see a rise in fatalities due to
What's your name again?
So those are other things that are factors that
Alright, thank you. Appreciate it. No problem.
in the health. And on top of the so stress from multiple commitments, as you were speaking to personally yourself, access to health care, and an absence of support when you were speaking at the house.
It's the robot built by slaves.
You know, that wasn't my personal experience, but I have witnessed it, and we do see a large number of African Americans who are in a household. And then restricted resources, whether they're educational resources or restricted resources, as in, well, if I seek treatment and they prescribe something, can I afford it? Can I afford the medication? And lack of knowledge, and then we go to the minority status being African American and female. So when we talk about those things in the social economic status, Professor Falls, how significant is that to dealing with not only health in general, but something as sensitive as mental health?
Well, let me just give you one statistic, one piece of evidence that I think helps the conversation. According to the 5-year estimate that was just released by the U.S. Census Bureau, the American Community Survey, in Montgomery County, we look at the percentage of people living below the poverty line. And they identify that if you select one race only and you are white, 13.3% of that population lives below the federal poverty line, which for a family of 4 is just about $22,000 a year. When we look at Black or African American, which are the designations used, that rate increases to 32.2%. So 32.2% of Black or African American individuals living in Montgomery County live below the federal poverty line. So, you know, the numbers are powerful.
And they speak.
Yeah.
And we were talking about Montgomery County.
Sure.
And so we're looking at a concentrated area. And so all of the things that we've talked about so far. And so when we include the idea of poverty to this, and all the things that this individual would have to be concerned with on a day-to-day basis, if you put it in day-to-day living, I think that when we think about how things should be and how they really are, I think that is a disconnect. You understand what I'm saying? When we think about it in a cognitive sense, and how we make sense of the world, and we say, I go to work, so we have the working world, which we ignore in this country. Working class, there's no such thing as speaking about a working class. We're not talking about people who do not work. Is that what you're saying? We're not talking about, there are individuals who work, who still are beneath the poverty line.
Oh, sure. I mean, if you work full-time in a minimum wage job, if you're the sole provider for a family of 3, you'll be below the poverty line.
Yes.
Right? If you're a single parent, or even if there are 2 parents in the family and one's unemployed, or you're both working part-time, part-time jobs, minimum wage part-time jobs are plentiful for a reason. It's cost-effective for the company, and there's an ample labor supply. So trying to raise a family on those sorts of wages is exceedingly difficult. So you're going to be working all the time and still struggling to make ends meet financially.
When I think about I thought about it, okay, say she is a student and she has a degree, but the marital status for African American is low. And so even if she's a professional and she's working, maybe she's a little bit above the line, she's enjoying the same benefits as a 2-income household because her marital status is not the same as other people, whether they're the Hispanic population, whether it's the white population. Her marital status is relatively low in concern to other groups. So if she's making $45,000 a year, she is a single mother of 2 children, maybe she's divorced now, she still is going to have struggles.
Sure. I mean, any single parent will have the time crunch of trying to provide a healthy meal
Yes.
for her children. We all have the struggles of,
Yeah.
of working and shopping and cooking, and it's much easier just to hit the drive-through at McDonald's on the way home
Yes.
and feed that unhealthy food options to your kids.
Yes.
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
I've been guilty of that too sometimes, you know. And I am a woman that cooks, but at times, you know,
What do you think I did?
working, I had a
How do you
stressful
think I
day.
did my
You're just thinking, I can just jump over here real quick, I can get something as fast as convenient, but at the same time, you're not thinking about the aspect of health when it comes to it. You're just focused on, I'm trying to get a meal to my kids, I've had a day, I don't want to be bothered with getting anything.
When you think, what I discovered in this research, what I found interesting, is when you talk about, when you're narrowing down the scope, just speaking of African American, the stress of discrimination, no matter how self-determined, because that's a word that we like to use, and AKA blow yourself up by your own stress. That's what that is, right? Okay. And so, and the stress of discrimination, what I discovered in the research was that African American women respond physically, emotionally different to racism and discrimination than African American. And it was not necessarily
Hey, Josh.
because of
I'm gonna run and get something to drink. I'll be back.
The research was done in predominantly white or predominantly male environments. And so the duality of racism and sexism that they would have to endure brings about more of more anxiety, more symptoms, health symptoms of abdominal pain, amnesia. I was like, oh, wow. Chronic back pain, chest pain. And so, and I've done this, I did a workshop maybe almost a year ago, Black Women's Think Tank in Sinclair. And so to bring this to the perspective and bring this to where they can understand what I was talking about, I said, okay, do you remember when your mother or the black women in the church had their baby? And they went,
Yes,
there you go,
I
there you
remember
go.
that. I
All right,
remember
all right, all right. That's what we're talking about. And so you didn't know a black woman probably over 40 who didn't have a nerve pills. And so, and that's how they dealt. And so over time, we've seen it progress in a different form. And and you may be leaving manual labor jobs. And so even if we take it, because I'm seeing it in leaving even out of a low social economic status. Because I watched a documentary with Deanna Van Zandt about maybe 2 weeks ago. And Debbie Thomas, the former famous Olympic gold medal, bronze medalist, and orthopedic doctor, actually has had mental health issues and is stagnated her career, and she is completely destitute. And how do you get to that place? And so through just kind of this research, the whole idea that it's not just totally, it's not one. You just cannot look at one facet and say it's all low social economic, women of low social economic status. There is a total dichotomy at work here.
I think another important element when we started the conversation today, we were talking about our social identity. What
Yes.
does it mean to be a black woman? Now, I don't have firsthand experience in this area.
I'm sorry, I feel sorry.
That's okay. But, I do teach around this subject, and I think it's worth mentioning that in addition to this social identity of being a strong woman, there's unfortunately another side to this, which is that African American girls predominantly are socialized in a way that often results in having low self-worth,
Yes.
in a poor self-image.
Yes.
So in my diversity classes at Sinclair, and even in my intro class now, we explore the work of Dr. Clark, Kenneth Clark, I believe his first name was, a psychologist in the 1950s. But in 2005, a 14-year-old African-American girl by the name of Kiri Davis reproduced Dr. Clark's famous doll test.
Yes.
So the video she produced is titled A Girl Like Me. And Pam, you've probably seen the video, hopefully in my class back in the day. But, you know, if you're not familiar with the doll test, the premise is that a tester will present a child with two dolls. A doll of color, a white doll, and ask the child questions about the dolls. Which is the pretty doll? Which doll looks like you? Which doll's the nice doll? Which is the bad doll? Why is that doll bad? And the video, if you look online, it's pretty easy to find. It's shocking when you watch these young girls, and young boys as well, struggle with realizing that they're saying this doll of color is ugly. And then which one looks like you?
Yes.
And you can see the conflict, the internal conflict. And I think, I don't think we spend a lot of time talking about that.
Yes.
It's another of these bootstrap myths. In other
Yes.
words, just get over it.
Yeah.
Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Be stronger, back to the strong image, and don't worry about these concerns you have. But I think, you know, in many points in life, they might create an acceptance of a mental health issue, like
Yes.
this is who I am. You know, I'm defective to begin with.
Yes.
And these are all powerful messages that prevent women, I think, in this specific case, from seeking out the treatment they need.
You know, you're bringing it today, Professor Frost. You are bringing it today. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I did research on colorism in intra-racism, and I found out when I went to a workshop that the Young Evangelist did on colorism, that colorism is the #1 cause for depression among women of color. Colorism. And so for you, those of you who do not know what colorism is, it's that light skin person. And it's that less than. And so the interpersonal development that is needed in the self-love and the self-esteem and even the self-efficacy is not able to be formed because there's no validation of who you are as a human being because your skin is brown, because your skin is dark. And so, and I can remember, I don't know about you, Sarah, but I can remember, I never wanted to be white. I wanted to be light skinned.
I had that one to be light skinned, and a lot of times, a lot of that was passed on from my grandmother. It used to start with, you need to use this cream so that you can get a little bit
come on with
lighter.
the cream.
And I used to feel like, well, why do I have to use this cream? What's wrong with my skin color? I think it's nice. What's the purpose of this? But it was passed down to her. And we do have people that are in our family that are of lighter color. And, you know, it's a thing that we embrace, but from that time period, from my great-grandmother to my grandmother, it was pushed down that you have to be light in order to make it in this world.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness, this is so good. That's one of those cultural things that, and it's intra. And I can remember, because it wasn't in my home. A lot of people say, well, this starts in your home. No. And my mother is mother's fair. And so I remember I could have been, I don't know, maybe 8, 9 at the most. And I was standing next to her. And this lady said, who is this? And she said, this is my daughter, Pam. And she said, are you sure? Because I was brown, you know, and my mother's fair. And I just thought, and I just remember shrinking. as a person, I just remember shrinking. And that's when it started coming to me, there's something must be wrong with me. There has to be something wrong with me. And so for a long time, and then that leads to wanting to find acceptance. It leads to, it leads to looking for validation in other forms. And I understand because I've watched Bill Duke's Light Skin documentary about being teased about being light skinned. And that whole, and all y'all, I know y'all, the doctor was in there big. But it stayed within the black community. White people do not look at you as, oh, you're light skinned. Oh, you're dark skinned. You know, from my understanding, to white people, we're just African Americans, we're just black. There's no hue thing going. But within us, so if you're not, what I've seen, if you're not accepted and you feel this need to be accepted in the white community, to integrate, and the pressures of integration. And then you deal with the pressures of being accepted because of your skin tone. Oh, Lord, I do. And so you would, that would put an internal struggle, in trust, because that would be internally struggle. And so we do see that. That is very, very significant in our, and then the images that we see in the media and body type images, all those things. The skin fading cream, that is a multi-million, if not billion-dollar industry worldwide for women of color. That is just not a United States thing. That is worldwide. Brazil, everywhere, and it causes cancer. And women will risk burning their skin. I'm so glad you brought up the creams. That nanololium skin cream. You better not go outside because you're gonna get dark.
Yes, I have that many days, and I just wanted to play outside.
Yes.
Like, I can't go outside because I'm gonna turn dark. I'm already dark skinned. Why do I have to be inside because I'm gonna turn even darker? I don't get it.
Yes.
So yes, and even when it comes to acceptance, I've even personally been through that, even all the way up until like mid-20s, where it's like I was trying to be accepted by my skin color, or if it wasn't skin color, it was, okay, well, maybe I got this economic stuff, I can be accepted. So it's just so many different issues when it comes to the acceptance. And sometimes I find it still a challenge even today.
Yes. Do you remember, do you remember, and I was in your class, you came to our class, our intercultural communication class, and you did the white privilege. And at the end, I was shaking. And I couldn't figure out what was going, because initially, and that's for those of you who do not know this, the exercise, explain the exercise.
So I think you're referring to the privilege walk?
Yes,
Sure.
privilege walk, yes.
So this is sort of a standard diversity workshop technique.
Yes.
And there are many different iterations, but essentially what you need to do is create a physical separation between people.